EdTech Mondays Kenya is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with EdTech East Africa.
Welcome to this edition of EdTech Mondays Kenya. We're coming to you from our studio with an insightful conversation lined up. This episode explores Kenya's rapid digital transformation and growing reputation as an EdTech trendsetter in the region. But beneath the innovation lies a tough reality. Unequal access to electricity, internet, and devices continues to hold many learners back, especially in rural areas. These gaps are not just technical, they have deep implications for equity, equality, and learning continuity. Now, without addressing these infrastructure and connectivity constraints, EdTech risks widening the very same gaps that it aims to close. Now, thank you for joining us on this edition. I'm your host, Ian Wafula. Before we look at how we can bridge the digital divide, let's take a look at some of the key terms that you'll actually hear throughout this episode. The first one is EdTech. This is the use of digital tools, platforms, and technologies to enhance teaching, learning, and educational administration. We also have the term connectivity, which is the ability to access digital networks and the internet. In the education context, for instance, connectivity affects whether learners and teachers can access online content and attend virtual classes or use digital learning platforms. Then we have infrastructure in EdTech. These are the physical and digital systems that enable technology-based learning like electricity, internet networks, and devices such as tablets or laptops. The other term is digital divide, which refers to the gap between individuals, schools, or communities that have access to digital technologies and those that do not have. Lastly, we have digital inclusion, which is the commitment to ensuring that everyone, especially the most disadvantaged, have both access and ability to effectively use information and communication technologies, that is ICTs. With that, let's get on to our discussion. With me in the studio today, we are joined by Eric Ode, who is the co-founder of Zeraki, and Lillian Joro, the innovation specialist at UNICEF. Thank you very much for joining us. Maybe you can I'll start with you, Lillian. Just tell us a bit about what you do so that we can get to understand the impact it has on our topic today.
Thanks a lot, Ian. So as UNICEF Kenya, our work in the Innovation, Youth, and T4D, or Tech for Development team, entails looking at how we are employing technology and innovative approaches across the work that UNICEF does. So whether that is within health, within WASH systems, education, etc., we work very closely with the different teams to see how we can scale what we are doing, what are the opportunities that technology brings. And then also we are very intentional about bringing in young people to shape that. So whether it's within civic engagement, with education as well, skilling, entrepreneurship, how do we set them up for success so that once they transition out of childhood, they're able to live and thrive as they continue as adults?
Yeah. What about you, Eric? As a co-founder, you definitely saw a gap. What is this gap you're trying to address with Zeraki, and what does your work entail?
So at Zeraki, we develop technologies that support teaching and learning in schools with the goal of improving learning outcomes. So we focus on two major areas: on digital learning, so developing digital learning tools that students can use to supplement the learning they do in class, but also teachers can use to support their work. And then on the other hand, we develop enterprise solutions, so school management systems, for lack of a better term, all the work that goes into administratively running a school. How do you use technology to make it easier, faster, better for the education stakeholders to actually manage that process?
And obviously, all those things you've mentioned cannot happen without necessary infrastructure. Lillian, as you move around the country and with your work at UNICEF, what is data telling us about the state of infrastructure in the country, and what kind of gap are we looking at between those who can access this infrastructure and those who can't?
Yeah, so the data paints a stark picture in terms of the disparities. While we see that about 97% of schools, public primary schools, have access to electricity, whether it's through the grid or solar, we only have about 20% of those schools that are connected to internet. And when we look at the digital divide, we know that we have 56% internet access in urban areas versus about 26%, half that in the rural areas. And this is even more lower when you look at areas like the arid and semi-arid areas, where you have internet access of even less than 5%. So once we look beyond the averages, I know we look at the averages as a country and we feel good, but once we start digging a bit deeper, we see that there are significant disparities, even in the urban areas. If you look at the informal settlements, there are still very serious gaps that we need to look at on the internet access front.
Just a quick one, Eric, are these figures surprising to you?
Not necessarily, because our experience in the field almost confirms what the data says. So if you look at schools in urban areas, they generally will have a little bit of access, especially around internet. Electricity is supposedly in a lot of schools, just about 97%, as Lillian has said. But if you were to look at, is it actually available and operational? If you go to schools in rural Kenya, they are connected to the grid, but half the time, or even more than half the time, there's no electricity.
Why do you think that's the case? What's the main cause of this kind of disparity we're seeing?
I think part of it is it's commercial. I mean, if I'm a commercial entity setting up infrastructure, I'm going to set it up in a place where I can get returns. And so unless the government and maybe development partners come in to supplement the work that private entities are doing, if we just leave it as a commercial problem, then those disparities are going to continue. Because if I think, even us as entrepreneurs, if I'm developing content, so I'll give you an example. When we're developing content, even for Zeraki Learning, we don't develop content for all subjects. And the reason is there are some subjects, like say Metalworks, that is only offered by probably less than 10% of schools. So from a commercial perspective, it would cost the same amount of money to develop content for Metalworks as it would cost to develop for English, but the market for English is much larger. And therefore, if you're looking at it purely from a commercial perspective, it does not make sense to develop content for Metalworks. But then it means the students who actually need that content do not have the content. So those are some of the reasons why you'll find that the disparities actually continue, because most of the services are being offered with a commercial mindset, but then it means you're optimizing for commerce, not for impact.
Yeah. And Lillian, the figures you're giving us, those are just not numbers. Those are children we're talking about. So paint for us a picture what that means to a student sitting in class in the capital here in Nairobi, or at a different place in the semi-arid areas that you're referring to. What does that actually look like? How does that impact them?
Yeah, so this cuts across the whole learner journey from, especially with this competency-based curriculum where digital literacy has been integrated as a key foundational skill. There are certain things that the learners are missing out on because they don't have access to these technologies. In some of these remote areas, we see that even the basic equipment, for example, for STEM subjects, whether that is the science experiments, they do not have that. Some of these gaps could be plugged in with if you have internet connectivity and you can use simulated virtual environments for this. But basically, even looking at learners with disability, learners who have different learning challenges, you're kind of left behind because you don't have some of these tools that could help you if it's doing the homework and the after school work that can help you catch up with the rest of the class. So we see significant disparities because the ones who have access are really miles ahead of their peers. And it's really a matter of access. Things that could be, if we could standardize across the board, then you have learners across the country being able to perform well in school and to do their best in the different categories.
What about for you, Eric? Paint for us a picture beyond the numbers. Paint for us a picture what this means for a student in class, the disparities here.
One of the, I would say, sad things is even if you remove the urban-rural differences, there's also a big difference in terms of access when you look at financial income. So the families that are generally financially capable will have a lot more access compared to, so whether they're in urban or rural, it really doesn't matter, compared to the families that don't have this kind of access. And actually the ones that don't have this kind of access are the ones who would benefit the most from some of these solutions. So if I give you an example with one of the tools that we've developed, which is Zeraki Learning, is a digital learning tool. We've developed it as a mobile app, which means for you to access it, you need internet, you need a mobile device. And if I'm already struggling with paying school fees, I don't have money for data, I don't have money for, probably every family has a mobile device, but mostly it will be a feature phone, so they actually can't log into the internet. So even in terms of availability, even if we say, okay, there's internet, there's electricity, if then the devices are not there, they're still not going to take advantage of it. And if you think about it, more kids attend day schools than boarding schools. So you could say they could access it in school, but then they're home in the evening, they're home over the weekend, they don't have these devices, they will fall behind. And most of the times, especially if you think about content, it is interrelated. So if I fall behind in one section of the content, there is some section of the content that I will struggle to understand. And then by the time I'm getting to the last class, it's a chain of events that students who actually would do well in school actually end up falling through the cracks, not because they are not capable, but because they are not well supported. And it's just sad.
And Lillian, listening to the both of you, it's clear that infrastructure plays a big role in terms of the gap. Are there any other barriers? So I'm looking at maybe capacity, like teacher training, or even attitudes when it comes to both parents, teachers and students as well, in terms of uptake of these technologies.
Yeah, there are definitely other barriers if you look beyond the infrastructure, and we've seen a lot of that from the implementation of the digital literacy program over the last decade or so. As you mentioned, the ICT integration from the educator lens is quite key, whether this is around perceptions, the skilling as well, capacity building. That's an element that needs to be factored in from the community as well, or the home life, the parents, the guardians. I think in some areas you have this perception that it's a nice to have, but they're not seeing the importance of it. So how do we start shifting some of those attitudes? We've also seen increase in issues like cybersecurity, issues of child protection when they're in this online environment. A lot more of those issues coming up, so we need to factor that in as we are getting more and more learners engaging on the online space.
Yeah, and Eric, maybe we can talk a bit about attitude. So when you're trying to onboard or bring on parents and teachers onto some of your platforms, what has been some of your the attitudes you're getting? You can even give us examples of what you've come across.
I would start by saying I think infrastructure is foundational, but then just infrastructure alone is not enough, because you can have the infrastructure, but if the mindset is not right, the attitude is not right, it still doesn't work. And with teachers, what we've seen is teachers actually want to use technology. The challenge we had, especially at the beginning, was they don't know how to use it. Not knowing in the sense of how to use a gadget, but how do you fit it into your day-to-day? Because teachers are not trained to teach using technology. Like, think about teacher training. It's a lecturer standing in front of a class teaching, and that's the way they know how to teach. And then you come with this technology and you're telling them you can integrate it into your day-to-day, and it sounds very nice, and they actually want to do it, but they don't do it. And
so is it from a curriculum point of view, or is it just their way of doing things as teachers?
It's not even curriculum, it's just their way of doing things. So I'll give you an example. When we started doing Zeraki Learning, I think that was 2015, it's actually the product that had a lot of interest from schools, because the pain point is very clear. Like, if you think about it, a teacher goes to a class and teaches 35, 40 students, and public classes are actually larger than that. You have a class with 70 students, and half of the students will not understand this concept the first time. So they need to go through it a second time, a third time, and on the fourth time, it's like, so that's what the teacher was talking about. But because of the constraint in resources, the teacher can't go back to the same class and teach the same thing. So if you give them something that allows them to direct students and say, okay, I know we already learned this in class, you can go and watch this video and go over it until you're okay. They will see the sense for it. But then now, if you think about the way the day of a teacher is structured, you have 8 lessons in a day. So your day starts at 8, it ends at 4:30. And then for 10 weeks, and then week 11, you have exams, and week 12, you're closing school. So the teacher is struggling to understand, where do I actually fit this thing in my day-to-day? And then, especially with the exams, I'll first do everything I know that works. And then if there's some time left, then we can try this technology. So that was really the first of the big challenge. The second was just teacher confidence in using technology. So I remember this is 2016, around February, March, I went to school. They had bought a projector in 2014. That projector was sitting in the principal's office for 2 years. It had not been removed from the box. I am the one who removed that projector from the box. So it's not like they didn't have the technology. But then now, because I was very curious, like what was going on here? So now when I started like connecting the projector, so you see they're like interested. The students know how to connect the projector. The teacher does not know. But the teacher doesn't want to look stupid, in quotes. So they are, instead of just calling a student and saying, take this thing, connect it here, let's use it, they are going to not want to look stupid. So they're not going to use it. So especially at those early days, the teachers were just not confident in using technology. But because, again, our training is the teacher is the authority. So the teacher is the one who is supposed to know everything. So how are you going to come to your class and tell your students you don't know something?
Lillian, is that something you've come across where there's sort of lack of, in terms of implementing some of the infrastructure, or just the inability to to embed some of these things into their day-to-day use?
I think we've seen a mix of both. We've definitely seen scenarios like Eric has described, where you have tablets that were, sent and they've never been removed from the boxes. You probe a bit and it's that element of we didn't really know what to do with this. So definitely, I think even when some of these programs are being rolled out, especially when they're being rolled out like nationwide, how does this trickle down to the school level? Because sometimes it seems like a top-down approach, but that integration piece as well. Fine, you have a tablet, but you have, the way you've been trained as an educator, this is how you run classes. So you need to see, how do we integrate this into our day-to-day learning? What does this entail? What are the opportunities within this? So there's a lot more in the operationalization piece of it beyond, setting up the infrastructure, providing the devices, etc.
So from an innovation perspective, which is a specialty, how then do we deal with this?
I think we can learn a lot from the human-centered design thinking. So looking at the end user, putting ourselves in their shoes. What does this mean if I'm an educator in a rural school in Mandera? I receive a bunch of tablets, I have a projector, where do I start, and kind of building from that. And of course, actually engaging them through that process, because I think some of the challenges we've seen is the educators, the learners are missing out when some of these initiatives are being rolled out.
And Eric, for you, so when you found that projector in the box, how did you deal with that situation, and how did you encourage the teachers to actually use it?
It's interesting. I agree with what Lillian is saying, because one of the things that then we realized was very powerful was just figuring out, for the specific context, what is a use case that resonate with them. Because you can use that projector for 10 things. But this particular school, for instance, didn't have, I think they had one science lab, but it was not fully equipped. So for them, it was just telling them, for example, if then you have a lab session where you are not able to do the actual practical, like simulation doesn't replace the actual practical, but it's better than not having the practical. And then they were like, actually, that makes sense. So then it's a very specific use case that responds to their immediate need. Then they start to see, then at some point they will figure out, by the way, I can even use it for this other one. But then I think the challenge is sometimes we deploy technology for technology's sake. So it's a very top-down, we've given you tablets, you have the laptops, but then they have not internalized, how does this actually change what I am doing? How does it fit into what I am doing?
For you, Lillian, what does a truly inclusive and connected learning environment look like in Kenya for the next 5 years?
I think a truly inclusive environment looks like every learner, no matter their geographical location, no matter their ability, no matter their gender, no matter their language, no matter their learning status, has the ability and the access to get all of these different tools. They are excited and they have opportunities to learn and to grow and to be curious. That there's nothing that external factors that impacts them having this access.
Yeah, and for you, Eric, as also your final word, perhaps your final advice, or rather an advice you have for policymakers or funders in this particular sector. What is lacking and what should we put our attention to?
Again, I think I'll still go back to infrastructure because it's foundational. It's like the soil, everything else is the seed. So if the soil is not there, it really doesn't matter. So all the schools, let's connect the schools, but then let's work with service providers. So for instance, if you think about it, there's the Kenya Education Cloud, which is supposed to host content. But then if there's no infrastructure, nobody can access it. But then the work of setting up infrastructure will also take time. A lot of families, for example, right now have TVs, even in the village with this solar pay, buy now, pay later. Why don't we take some of this content and make it available in the devices that are already available in schools and with the families? And then a lot of the network operators, for example, why don't we consider zero rating access to content? Because then it creates an opportunity for everyone to have the same kind of access. Because one of the things that really, I have an 8-year-old daughter and I have an 8-year-old cousin, like an 8-year-old nephew. They are age mates. And you can see the difference because my daughter goes to a private school in the city and my nephew goes to a public school in the village. It's a stark difference. And the only difference is the location. So my vision really is we should get to a point as a country where it doesn't matter where a child is born, they will have the same access and the same opportunities at life.
All right, thank you very much, Lillian and Eric, for making time for us. Now, it's truly enlightening to understand the real impact that inadequate infrastructure has on learning and the ongoing efforts to close that gap. However, despite this important work, several common myths and misconceptions about EdTech and infrastructure still persist, and they risk undermining meaningful progress. The first one is that you need a fully equipped computer lab for EdTech to work.
Many EdTech solutions, including those from startups like Zeraki, are mobile fast and can run on basic smartphones. With the right tools and training, even a single device can support impactful learning in a classroom or home.
Another myth is that EdTech is only useful for urban or well-resourced schools.
In fact, EdTech can be a powerful equalizer when designed for inclusivity. It allows rural learners to access the same content as their urban peers and opens up opportunities for teacher development, exam prep, and digital literacy, regardless of location.
The third myth is that parents and teachers need to be tech experts to use EdTech tools.
Most modern platforms are built to be intuitive and mobile-friendly. Training and onboarding, like those offered by many startups in the country, can make even first-time users confident participants in digital learning.
And the final myth is that we need to wait for perfect infrastructure before rolling out EdTech.
If we wait for perfect conditions, we risk leaving more learners behind. Piloting small, adaptable solutions with what's already available, like shared tablets or computer labs, can create meaningful impact while infrastructure continues to improve.
Now, with that debunking of some common myths and misconceptions, I'd like to turn to you, Eric. So what are some of the simple and practical ways that teachers and parents can actually use in terms of technology to support learning, especially in areas where infrastructure is limited?
Actually, I think one of the assumptions about EdTech is that you need a computer lab or a fully set up facility to be able to use it. But that's really not true, because one of the things we've seen is the teachers are actually very innovative as long as they understand the use case and they see how it creates value for them and for their students. So one example that comes to mind is Farasilen. So the principal, Madam Jennifer Wiso, so the school doesn't have a computer lab, but then the students actually benefit from Zeraki Learning. So what she does is she downloads content for them on her laptop. And then when they have time, either in the evening or over the weekend, so it's a day school, but she actually allows them to come to school because they don't have devices at home. Most of them don't come from like well-off families. So even if they wanted to study at home, they don't have the devices, but she opens up the school to them over the weekend, and anybody who wants to study can come and study, and they use her laptop. So you see, it's not for lack of like a computer lab. It's like, how do you conceptualize the material for that particular context?
And a final word, perhaps, what advice would you give educators or parents who feel discouraged about the lack of infrastructure? I mean, some of them listening to this conversation, they just feel, especially if they have access to limited infrastructure, they'd feel very discouraged. What would you tell them?
Start where you are. So look, I remember when we rolled out Zeraki Analytics in a school in Siaya, and one of the concerns for the principal was that the teachers were not going to embrace it. and the teachers were going to ask for data and whatnot. And I told them, just start with 1 or 2 or 3. As long as they see value, they're going to take it up. And even for the parents, because sometimes the challenge is, I don't have another phone for the child. But when you're at home in the evening, and which is what we've seen a lot of parents do, when you're at home, just give the child your phone to study with. They'll need it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and they'll give it back to you. But that 20 minutes, 30 minutes is enough for them to actually learn a concept.
Well, thank you very much, Eric, for that. Now at least parents and teachers know how to access your platforms. Well, that's it for this edition of EdTech Mondays Kenya. Remember to follow us on social media using the hashtag EdTech Mondays to share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Special thanks to our sign language interpreter, Ms. Rose Omolo. My name is Ian Ofula. Until next time, goodbye.
EdTech Mondays Kenya is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with EdTech East Africa.